Check, check, mic check. Check, check, mic check. Welcome to Podcast Envy. I'm your podcast boss, Andrea Klender. Today, I am continuing our conversation on powerful pandemic podcasting pivots with the host of Distribution Talk, Jason Bader. I have been editing Distribution Talk and working with Jason on his show for about a year or so now, and I have to say, if you have any doubts about starting your own podcast, or you're feeling burned out with your existing show, you are in the right place. This episode is like an energizing spirit team-led pep talk for podcasters. And frankly, I'm not surprised because that's what Jason does in his work as a speaker, trainer, and consultant for wholesale distributors across the United States with his company, The Distribution Team. That's not to say that this is all sunshine and rainbows. Since launching Distribution Talk, Jason has had to adjust expectations and get real about sponsorship and growth in the medium. During this pandemic, he's had to shift a lot of things around in his business, but he's taking it as an opportunity to learn what he loves to do and what old processes, systems, and activities, honestly, he can live without. And most importantly, he's adapting. One thing I love about Jason is his ability to take a seemingly mundane topic or problem and turn it into a fascinating case study for how we can do things better. I mean, who knew this podcast boss and theater kid would ever be interested in conversations about trucking, logistics, inventory, supply chain management? But hey, it happens. If this is your first time listening to Podcast Envy and you are a podcaster or aspiring podcaster who wants to dig deeper into the craft and culture of podcasting, I am so happy to have you. As maybe you can tell already, Podcast Envy is not solely about how to podcast. Though, as your podcast boss, I am full of advice and opinions on that front. But more so, this is about the why of podcasting and how to be a podcaster. I take this job of being a podcaster quite seriously, and also I love it so much that I want to help you make shows that you and your audience will love too. Jason loves leveraging his show as a platform to inspire the leaders and future leaders in his field. Links to find Distribution Talk and connect with Jason on LinkedIn can be found in the show notes, in your episode description, and at thecreativeimposter.com/podenvy060. And now, here's Jason Bader. Are you the founder of the Distribution Team?
I am not. No, I actually was dumb enough to buy this thing. I was foolish enough to get lulled into, hey, kid, you want to buy this from me? I'm thinking about retiring. And I wanted to be like this guy. I mean, I loved watching him. I enjoyed watching him speak. I enjoyed the way that he took relatively boring material and animated it. And so that's how I got involved with the Distribution Team. And then Distribution Talk fell out of that.
It's funny that you say taking a relatively mundane or boring topic and making it interesting and engaging, because I have to say, as your podcast editor, as someone who has never once thought about wholesale distribution in my life or had any reason really to, I think that is actually a legacy that you are carrying on through your podcast at the very least. Because I know that sometimes I find myself listening and I'm just listening to, smooth it out and make sure it sounds really good. And then sometimes I actually am like, oh, that's a good point. I should think about that more. Oh, yeah, that's really interesting. I have learned so much about wholesale distribution and I did not even know that was possible.
Well, it's definitely a forgotten industry. And nobody ever comes out of school and says, God, I want to get into wholesale distribution. That sounds awesome. That's not something that many people aspire to do. But what happens is maybe they'll go to work in a wholesale distribution company during the summer, or it'll be a part-time gig or something I'm going to do right after college just because I need a paycheck. And then it just gets its hooks in you, and people all of a sudden realize it's a really great way to make a living, and it's a great industry. And, it's really kind of interesting that it actually makes up, I think it was 26.5% of the U.S. gross domestic product. 26.5%. I was like, oh my God, this is a huge business, but we don't ever talk about it. And so it's a fairly mundane, it's a quiet type of business, but it's full of all these really fascinating characters, interesting people who never thought they would go into it, and then they're still in it.
I remember that when you and I first met, one of the things that you
Mm-hmm.
said to me that was your intention for starting the show was connecting with all of these different wacky characters. Is there a particular size of business, fields, or industries that you're specifically working with?
I've always had my practice primarily around smaller family businesses, and I tend to gravitate more towards the construction related distribution businesses. The personality types you see in here are very, far ranging. I mean, you have the ones that are really tight to the vest. They barely want to give up anything. They don't want to tell you anything about their business, and you're pulling teeth. And frankly, they make a terrible interview. They're no fun to talk to unless I really feel like picking on them or something, and showing that. But no, I think what's wonderful is once you get people comfortable, man, they've got a lot to say. And I think that was kind of a big epiphany for me as well. When I started speaking, when I left the family business and I actually got my first speaking gig and consulting stuff, I found out that I knew a lot. I really didn't know. I know a little bit more than I thought. And it just started to flow out of me. And so that's kind of what I see in my guests. It flows out of them. They start to get comfortable with the medium. And I think, looking face to face, while we're talking, it helps at times. Yeah. Then they start to develop their own personality and they start to go, and I get all kinds of funny stuff that comes out of them. As you know, you hear it all the time, but then I get really insightful things, and I don't always know where the conversation's going to go, but it always gets there.
Do you have a favorite interview that you can think of?
Well, I think we can go back to, one of the more recent ones, with Dirk Beveridge. He's just a firecracker. I mean, he's just fun to interview. But I think it's also because he and I get each other. We both have very common goals. We want to serve that community. A lot of people, if you listen to our interviews, you would have thought I knew this guy for 20 years. I have seen Dirk once in my life.
Okay.
Personally interacted with him, and he and I were down in Brazil. That was it. Beyond that, and I've only known him really for less than a year, but we have this rapport, and that's because I feed off his energy. I love his energy. There was one that I was a little concerned. I didn't know which way it was going to go. It was a guy named, Jim Henderson, and Jim is a man of deep faith. I knew he was going to go down the religion side, and as a host, you're really like, where are we going to go with this? This one's going to hit the editing room floor. I guarantee it. But I think I really loved hearing about his relationship, with his faith and his business, because that's not necessarily part of my life.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes looking at those differences and listening to that, it's fascinating for me. And I think every time I do an interview of someone who is not just like me or has always the same thoughts that I do, I learn a little bit, I grow a little bit, and I think it's fascinating. I think it just makes me want to keep doing this.
Yeah, I think that's a common, I don't want to say mistake, but a missed opportunity that a lot of podcasters have is obviously we want to hang out with people who think like us and have similar interests to us. And then there is also this opportunity to share somebody who's coming from a different perspective or a different point of view,
Right.
that can make for an interesting conversation that you can learn and grow from and that your audience could learn and grow from as well.
Right. And I think, that's part of who we have to be as a host. We have to be open to those opportunities. And I think sometimes I step back and I have to look at what's my responsibility here and where's my role. And my role is, I think, to expose people to different thoughts and ideas. There are certain limits, of course, I'm gonna couch. But if I listen to the message, whether I would have said that message in the same manner, I listen to, for example, in that individual, caring about others and wanting to see the best in others, and also being very humble about, hey man, sometimes I am insufferable. And I love people who understand that about themselves. And if I can share that with an audience, I think that's part of my responsibility.
Yeah. And I think one thing about you as a podcaster, so I don't know if you know this about me, but I think of all of my clients, like I give them almost podcaster personalities in my mind.
Oh, that's
And
interesting.
so I describe you as Jason is the guy who knows everybody in the industry. And if you don't know him yet, you should, because he can connect you with everybody else. And it's funny that earlier you said that a lot of times you'll have an interview and it seems like you've known this guy forever, but you're building that rapport with them almost in the moment on the spot.
It's really more genuine curiosity and I think wanting to understand why that person is doing what they do. And I think also understanding what do they contribute to the world. I truly believe that everyone who I've interviewed so far, I mean, and I imagine I'm going to hit the one that does not, but I believe that they all have something to give and they all have something to share. And so when I am speaking with them, I think my first goal is to try to get them comfortable because this isn't their natural state. This isn't what they do for a living. And getting them comfortable that, hey, this is going to be okay. It's not scripted. This is going to be an okay conversation with this person. And they're not going to throw the gotcha moment at me. That's not the intent. And once they're comfortable, I think then I start to kind of feel out their personality a little bit. And I think also one of the most important things that I've recognized is when I look at the playback later and I look at the audio, I want to have less than 20% of the squiggly lines be Jason. And I want all of the audio to be that guest. I mean, I think the more I can let them speak, the better off the show is.
I never knew that was your ratio, and I'm making a note of it for future episodes.
We were always taught from a sales perspective, if you can get the client talking more and more, there's greater potential for success. And the more that client is comfortable with you and the more they get to talk about themselves and their challenges and their problems, then we are now a trusted member of their circle. And that is very similar to the way that these interviews go is I want them to talk. I want them to enjoy the experience more than me.
Wait, do you hear it? That music must be signaling something. Ah, yes, the Podcast Angel segment has arrived. This is my opportunity to share some wonderful podcasting product, service, company, or opportunity that I think may be just the thing that you are looking for. And not only that, but in some way, these podcast angels provide compensation for me in return for the mutually beneficial introduction. Allow me to introduce you to Craft and Culture. This is my exclusive members-only resource area on patreon.com, where you can get all of your podcasting questions answered. Support around growth and expansion, inspiration, ideas, resources. For just $5 per month, you can access my growing library of podcast master classes like Launch Your Podcast, Get Better Interviews, and coming June 2nd, 2020, Responsive Podcast Content Strategy. You'll also get a premium podcast feed where you can send me questions about your show and then I will answer them on the podcast. Upgrade to VIP and you'll also get office hours for some FaceTime online with me and a shout out on Podcast Envy. By the way, VIP membership is only $19 right now, and that will be good until June 1st, 2020, and at that point it will go up, but not away. Join me at thecreativeimposter.com/craft and culture. Linked, of course, in the show notes for this episode. I would love to be a part of your podcast spirit team. So speaking of sales,
Yeah.
tell me a little bit about how the podcast, how does that fit into your business strategy?
Well, I think it's changed. When you go into it, you have starry eyes that, I'm going to have, 10,000 downloads every round and people are going to throw money at me left and right, because I am just awesome. So originally when I did this, and really, if you think about that sales comment I made earlier, the reason that I jumped on this was, frankly, another podcaster. He talked about how he started this show called The CEO Show. And it was really just to create relationships with potential clients, for his company. And I thought, oh my God, that's the most brilliant thing I've ever heard in my life, because he was getting the door slammed in his face constantly if he was just going approaching them. But if he came to a CEO and said, Can I interview you for my show? All of a sudden, the doors started opening. And so I thought, wow, that's a brilliant idea, but I'm going to narrow down the focus to my niche, which is the distribution business. I thought, wow, this is going to be a great way to pick up clients. I'm going to get more speaking gigs, consulting gigs, and all of these things by forming these relationships. And I realized later that it wasn't about doing that for me. It actually became more about the enjoyment of this. I enjoy speaking to people. I enjoy bringing their message out. It is an enjoyable part of my practice. I'll put it that way. And now I frankly enjoy it more than getting up on stages and doing all of that. And, and I think a lot of podcasters believe that this is a means to that end. The show is a means to get up in front of audiences. And for me, it was actually kind of the opposite. What I've realized is that it is a way for me to leave the stage. The stage is exhausting, and don't get me wrong. I love getting up in front of people. I think it's fun connecting with people, seeing people in the audience react. I love that. I hate getting on airplanes now. I'm just so tired of it. And I've been doing it a long time. I mean, I've been flying for 16 years, professionally and getting up on stages and whatnot. And this actually is it's just a rewarding experience. I love this. I mean, I could do this constantly. So, where does it fit in my business? It's now a way for me to have conversations with people. And now sometimes those conversations go into my writing. I mean, I write articles for magazines and will absolutely admit that a podcast that I interviewed that I did the day before will be the article that is due the next day. It just will. And so I found that has really helped. And it has led to me being invited to speak at other events and do some other things. I think, though, that also this ability to sit in my own office and make money and to do meaningful work, this has kind of allowed me to shift my practice to doing this in other ways. I now do more phone-based consulting work. I do more Zoom-based consulting work right now. I do Zoom-based facilitation. And I think honestly, a lot of it came from my comfort level with this show, but also the realization I didn't have to get on airplanes to make money.
Yeah.
And that's been a phenomenal byproduct of this.
Man, Jason, now you got me second guessing my career aspirations because I'm the one that's sitting here. So quite literally before all this COVID thing happened, I attended one of the last conferences that was able to happen before everything started getting shut down. And I spoke there. And I love getting on stage. I love performing. I love having a live audience. And, I love doing podcasts too. But I was like, oh, I've been doing podcasting thing for 5 years. And, there's nothing like the live aspect of something. And you don't have to go back and edit it later. And
Absolutely.
that sort of thing.
Yeah. And I agree with you. As I said, I adore getting up on stage. It's fun. I enjoy it. I like making people laugh. I like, having them look at me like I'm a crazy person.
Yeah.
I love that part of it. And it does pay well. Let's not kid ourselves. It can pay very, very well. And that's nice. But I'll be honest with you, in the last 6 weeks, I haven't missed it. I don't miss it. I'm not missing getting up on planes anymore or traveling as much as I did. And I think, it also is because, I have younger children and I want to be there.
Yeah.
I don't like missing things with my family. And so I'm going to have to, make a change. And podcasting that was part of that change. That was something I was going to do. And is it tougher to get sponsors? Sure, it's tougher than I thought. I thought they'd be pounding the door down, of course, but that's not always the case. But are they out there? Absolutely.
And I think podcast sponsorship is one of those. There are podcasting consultants who will sell you the dream of making money by getting sponsorships for your podcast from go. And it's not usually the reality, like you said, unless you are somebody who has an enormous following, like some kind of celebrity status or, online presence, that you are getting those 10,000 downloads right out the gate because you already had this online following.
Mm-hmm.
And they are out there, but it's also like advertising on podcasts is sort of like the wild, wild west right now. And we're going to talk a little bit about the pandemic situation. But right now in this moment, people who rely on ads and sponsor revenue for their income are kind of screwed right now
Yeah,
because people are still advertising, but rates have dropped like way down. People have put packages on hold and things like
right.
that. So it's like, okay,
Yeah.
well, how do we shift these things? What do you see shifting for you, both in terms of your business? And then is there anything different about how you are approaching your show or your content or anything different about the podcasting process?
Well, I think that there's a lot of fear. I mean, there's definitely a lot of fear. And I actually do facilitate groups of distributors, and we talk a lot about what you're doing around this. And literally, I had two of these today. But the barrier to guests, I think that's really honestly been the biggest challenge. Early on in the process, I had a list of 25 people I wanted to interview, and I got most of them. And then all of a sudden, I was scrambling. I was like, uh-oh, who am I going to interview next? And I think what I've realized is that I didn't plan well enough. And so I think that if you're wanting to have a continuing show, and I think, I got past the 8 shows, right?
The 8 shows till pod fade.
That's right, till pod fade. I got past that, but I think the biggest barrier is to not be far enough ahead of your show, and not
Yeah.
looking far enough ahead to new guests and to looking for those opportunities. So I've been doing this almost a year, and I've started to realize that there are things I love about the show and things I really don't love about the show, or
Yeah.
love about the process.
Yeah.
I was pretty darn sure I did not want to mix my own podcast. And so I'm thrilled that you all do this, for us. But I have come to the realization that hunting for guests is not my most favorite thing to do. I'm not in love with that process, but somebody else is. And I have to find that person. Who is that person that's going to basically book guests for me going on? I think, and this is just something that's been coming to me, that if I'm no longer booking guests, the diversity of the show is going to change. It's not going to be just people I want to talk to.
Mhm.
It's now others. And I think that really is going to make it a little more challenging, but it's also, I'm going to find more diverse personalities. I'm going to not always pick this, fine Southern gentleman, who's been running their family business for the third generation. And I'm not going to go for the easy marks. I think it's
Yeah.
going to be interesting that other people will find, interviews that I never would have really thought possible.
Interesting. See the things you learn about your clients when you interview them on your show? Had no idea.
Yeah. Well, it's just, again, what are those barriers? As a host of a show, if you really want to have longevity, you start handing the things over that you don't particularly enjoy about the process
Mhm.
to others who can do it much better than you can. I mean, and that's really same thing that all my clients do is if you really want to be successful in these businesses, that you find people who are smarter in different aspects or enjoy these things more. Somebody who is good at finance, great, get the best one you've got possible, because I don't want to do that. And, I don't want to do payroll. I don't want to sell. You hire people to do this. And I think that's where we start to recognize that this show is kind of like that business, that a successful podcaster, I think, will move parts of the process away from themselves and really focus in on what do they love and what do they do best.
And in terms of the pandemic time,
Yeah.
you had a conversation with your business partner, Marshall
Yeah.
Jones, about some predictions in your industry and in your field in general. And
Mhm.
I was laughing actually because I think Marshall's standard answer was always, well, it's too soon to tell.
Oh God, I
He
know.
was like,
He's going to be a great consultant because he can't answer. He won't answer, And I think that's kind of funny because Marshall and I we play off each other because I tend to be very everything on my sleeve. I'll just tell you whatever I think,
yeah.
Whereas Marshall's more calculated. He kind of holds it back, and he makes sure that I'm not sure. I'm willing to do the crystal ball there, and he and I tend to be able to talk about subjects and be able to kind of come from a little different perspective each time, but we can carry a conversation for a long time. But both of us have also had the experience and spoken to enough other people to start talking and forming our own opinions here. And I think that's one of the things about making a prediction show or whatnot. You don't have to be right. You can just give it a shot, you know? One of the other, I guess, wonderful things about doing client work, outside of the podcast and working with individual groups. As I kind of mentioned before, I do facilitate these online groups. I have, the Hollywood squares of Zoom people, around, and all of them are talking about, what their companies are doing in response to this crisis right now. And I get to gather that. And then I get to funnel that into the microphone and share that with people. And if I can spark an idea in one of the people that's listening, they're driving down the road and they say, yeah, that's a pretty good idea. Wasn't my idea. It was some conversation that I had that I just happened to share that.
Yeah. So speaking of that person driving down the street, or maybe sitting at their
Maybe
house.
walking or right. Yeah. Or sitting
Right
there
now.
by themselves.
Sitting there by themselves in their
Right.
house. I sometimes think with podcasting, it's challenging because you see like the numbers behind the scenes of your stats of how many people are listening or downloading the episodes. But we don't really always have a lot of information about who those people are unless we get crafty about how we figure those things out. And I think that your listenership is probably pretty niche. Do you have a sense of who your listeners or who your audience members are? And how do you think of your show as a resource or an asset or something useful for your actual listeners?
I think the original goal was I wanted the audience to be other business owners, primarily somebody who was moving into a family business. They might have been the second generation or third generation, but that next incumbent generation who is looking for a little guidance, So that was what I was hoping for. Business owners. I had honestly wanted to reach students who are considering different careers, maybe in logistics, distribution, and I wanted to reach those people, and I wanted to expose that, hey, this isn't a bad career. This is a fantastic career if they want to get involved with it. But now I think the same people who were reading my articles before and maybe reading my newsletters and things like that, I think they're the ones who are listening. I will say that there's a younger demographic that is listening because I do hear from those people. They will reach out to me and ask a question or so. I think that's the golden moment. If I recall correctly, it had to be a few months ago at least. I sent you a text, a picture. This guy, and this probably wasn't the smartest thing on their part, was they had taken a picture of them listening to the show on their car. Oh, it had a little digital display on the car.
Yeah,
and
the
I
dashboard,
I thought, oh, that was kind of cool. I think that's the beautiful part about this. When I look at the stats and I think one of the more fascinating things is to look at the different countries that people are listening to your show. You're like, Bangladesh, huh?
Right. You're like, is that real?
Yeah. You look at that, it's like, yeah. And then you'll see Ghana or you'll see Spain. And I look at these different places and I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe there's some interest there, and, you get those wild fans. Well, maybe they'll ask me to speak. And I'm like, no, you're not doing that anymore. Stop. You're not doing those types of things.
Old habits die hard, man.
I know they do, it's that ever elusive Dubai gig, and I don't get as caught up in the numbers as I was for a while there. I think, I shared with you a while back, I was like, well, how do I find out exactly how many, people are listening? Because I'm going to use that measurement to go get sponsors and all. I don't have to know that anymore, where that was a very, very big part of my early belief around the show and what I wanted out of the show was numbers. And that's not what I want anymore. I think for me, it just kind of fulfills a creative need, that I enjoy doing this and I enjoy being able to talk to people.
Yeah. And you had also mentioned in your episode with Marshall and then also with me, you had mentioned how this technology of being able to connect with people, whether it be via podcast or whether it be via Zoom, is so important right now, not even just from a business perspective, but even like from a personal, like human to human perspective. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that. There is this missing connection, this missing connectivity between people. And although, yes, there is technology available, people are craving it right now. I think it's just so fascinating. I can't just go to a restaurant and sit down with somebody anymore. And that's just weird. I don't get it. I can't go ahead, sit down and have coffee. I love having coffee with people. I enjoy that. And I can sit for hours with people and have that connection. And because we can't right now, I think that, podcasting and meetings over Zoom, I haven't quite gotten to like the little house party thing. I'm not there yet, or, or the virtual happy hour. I have virtual coffee with friends, but I don't have virtual happy. I think that's silly. I'm sorry. And maybe I'll come around, and I don't want to pass judgment on anybody, but it is a good second best. It's not the real thing. It's a little different, but I mean, honestly, I can have a great day having virtual coffee. Well, I have to knock off the caffeine, but but connecting with people through the computer now.
Yeah.
And I'm getting better at it, and I think that everybody is getting so much more accepting of that medium that really the way that we conduct these interactions is going to change fundamentally.
Do you have any advice for a new podcaster who is just getting started with their show?
I think my biggest piece of advice is really to know, what do you want to do with that show? What are you trying to create? What's the goal of the show? Getting people just to talk on a show, you're going to fade in about 8 episodes. I think if you plan for a show, your business plan, if you will, is something that will always change. It can evolve, and not making it too finite. You have to have some structure to it, but it also has to be flexible. I think that's where you do it. And, as far as being able to finance it, because that is a barrier. I get that. You can go out and ask for money, and there is money to be had. Don't shy away from that. If you need to, finance a portion of the production cost of your show, then go find that money.
Aside from getting someone else to book your guests for you, so you don't have to do that part of the process.
So you see, I'm a fundamentally lazy person, okay? I don't want to get on airplanes. I don't want to book my own guests. I can barely get dressed in the morning some days, so.
I think we're all in that boat at the moment.
Yeah.
But aside from that, do you have any big dreams for the show specifically, or do you have any ideas about where it may evolve to, let's say, another year from now?
I don't. I don't. Would I love to see? I would like to see more diversity in guests. And that's where I think by taking myself out of the equation, I might get that. Another thing is I need to be a little bit stronger, I'll be honest with you, about, sponsorship, and really think that through. I've relied on one sponsor, and really I was very honest about what I intended to do, and they believed that, and it's gone well for them. But I've been reluctant to go out and look for others. And I think that I've fallen in love with the process so much. I was just thinking about this last night. I was walking later in the evening, and why couldn't I do a different show? And why do I have to limit myself to one show? There's no reason to. And I think once you kind of get it hooked on the medium, and it's like, wow, this is exciting. All of a sudden, these different show ideas, they pop up. They just bang. Oh, well, maybe I'll do this one, or maybe I'll do that one. I will say one other thing I really love about this process, and maybe it does feed my ego, I don't know, is that people ask me, well, how do I get into this? And now I can tell them. Now that I actually, and literally a gentleman on an interview that I did recently said, I've really enjoyed listening. And, I always thought maybe I'd love to have a show about this. And I now have somebody, I can refer them to you, but I can also talk them through the process. I can say, look, well, here's what I do, and here's the mistakes I made going into it, and here's what I love about it. But anybody can do it. That's the thing I love about it, is that if you're willing to research a little bit and, give it a shot, and there's a little bit of financial investment, but a lot less than I thought it was going to be, I'll be honest with you. People are shocked when I tell them what I paid in equipment. It's like, they're expecting that I could have paid, $700, $800 or a couple $1,000s for my podcasting studio. I'm like, no, man. I maybe got $200 in this thing. It's like, come on, man. I think that there is a low barrier to entry, and people don't know that. And they should know that. They need to know that they can record, anything they want and have a voice. And God, I'll tell you, I think one of the fascinating things, Andrea, is the technology and how accessible it is for us to do this. I mean, this particular medium we're talking over right now is Squadcast. I mean, fascinating at $20 a month. I mean, that's just crazy to me. There is so much available to people now that I think they should try.
It is a slippery slope when you start thinking about having more than one show. I can
I saw you cringe. I saw you go, oh, it is, and you are probably so right. And I should just actually derail from that right now. Just, touch the third rail and move away quickly, son. So
is there anything else that you want to share with Podcast Envy listeners today?
If you feel like you've got a show, give it a shot. The only downside is it stops. Try it. You know more than you think. By going through a show or really any time you get up and you want to get in front of an audience of any kind, you learn stuff about yourself. And I think that's just this journey, it's discovery. And yeah, you're going to have a show and have guests on it every week and you're going to do, there's no way I would have thought about that. There's no way. But then you realize all of a sudden, you can do things and you're better than you think you are. I think sometimes through whether it is, a self-esteem issue or whatever it may be, is this barrier for you to attempt these new things. I guess I urge the listeners just, push through that and give it a shot. Maybe you'll be okay at it, maybe you won't, but you will never know unless you give it a shot.
Podcast Envy is produced by your podcast boss, Andrea Klunder. That's me. The Podcast Envy theme music is by Valentin Sosnitsky, courtesy of the Free Sound Project at freesound.org, and our podcast Angel music is by Benjamin Mastropolito, also on freesound.org as Lemon Cream. All music is licensed under the Creative Commons. Our episodes are mixed by Edwin Ruiz, and hey, if you want your show to sound as good as ours, hire us. Put the magic audio mojo of the Creative Imposter Studios to work for you. Thanks so much for listening, and here's to making your podcast the envy of everyone else.